So, this doesn't belong here. I'm not talking about the rug. I'm talking about the scripture. This doesn't belong here. This is the wrong day for this scripture of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Ordinarily, this is the scripture that we get on Maundy Thursday, the Thursday before Easter. Ordinarily, that is when we read this scripture. That's why a lot of churches on their Maundy Thursday services have foot washing ceremonies. Here's where it gets interesting. So, here in the Gospel of John, Jesus has come to Jerusalem for the last time. Here in the Gospel of John, on his last trip to Jerusalem, he and his disciples have gathered for a meal. Now, this is not what we typically call the Last Supper. See, they have come here to celebrate Passover, but in the Gospel of John, they don't eat the Passover meal together. In the Synoptic Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus and the disciples come together to eat that Passover meal. And in fact, normally on Maundy Thursdays, when we get together, that is the Passover meal, the Last Supper that we remember. So the story that we get about Jesus' last week is a little different in the Gospel of John than it is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So what we tend to do is we tend to take little bits and pieces from all of the different Gospels and bring them together to tell the whole story. So this passage about foot washing is not normally what we have right now. So thanks to the narrative lectionary that we follow, y'all are lucky. We're 5 weeks ahead of all the other churches. I don't know if that means we get to go to Lugies faster, but we'll see. Something else that doesn't belong here is Jesus washing his disciples' feet. That absolutely does not belong here. Now, it was the custom back in those times and back in those days for a host to provide water so that the guests of a meal, the guests at a house, could wash their own feet. This is a very ancient tradition. In fact, if you go back to Genesis, y'all think back that far? Good. Back in Genesis, when Abraham is visited by the 3 strangers who are God, the 3 divine angels, the 3 angelic messengers, Abraham provides them with a bowl of water to wash their feet. This is a long-standing tradition. Now, if your host was incredibly wealthy and had a plethora of slaves, then one of their slaves would wash your feet, and it was almost exclusively a female slave that would wash your feet. For a free man to wash the feet of another free man in that day and age was entirely unheard of. Think back to Genesis. Abraham didn't even wash the feet of the angels, but Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. Completely unheard of. An act that completely did not belong. So maybe it's appropriate then that the text does not belong here. Because Jesus washing his disciples' feet did not belong. You see, Jesus didn't have to wash his disciples' feet, but he had to. Now, I've said this before, I'll probably say it again, and I've told the story I'm about to tell before, and I'll probably tell it again. Some of you may have heard it before, and if you haven't heard it before, you will hear it again, because it's one of my favorite stories, and as the preacher, I get to tell whatever story I want. You get to choose whether or not to listen. So, when I was about 13 years old, my sister and I were riding bikes in our neighborhood. And she was in front of me, and I was behind her, and I don't really know what came over me, but suddenly I had this inspiration to knock her off her bicycle. And I learned something very important that day. I learned about physics. When you're on a bicycle, you know that front tire moves, right? Y'all are familiar with the concept of bicycles and front tires moving? Yeah. The rear tire of a bicycle does not move. And so when you're behind a bicycle and you try to knock that back tire with your front tire, the front tire moves and the other bike's tire doesn't move. So sure enough, I'm riding up with my sister, and I tried to kind of ram into her with my front wheel. The front wheel hits her back wheel. It goes spinning at a 90-degree angle, throws my hands off the handlebars, and I flip over the bike onto the ground, sit up, and my left arm is completely crooked. Now, thankfully, my sister did not know that I was trying to knock her off her bicycle because she thought I just fell off because I was clumsy. So she was willing to go get help. So she went and got help and go to the doctor, and sure enough, I've got a broken left arm. Left arm is in a cast up to the middle of my bicep. So if you have ever had a bone stuck in a cast before, made of plaster, you know there's one thing you absolutely cannot do is to get it, well, scratch it too, but I did. Get coat hangers, you just ram them down in there. But you can't get it wet, because if you get it wet, it'll fall apart. So, 13-year-old boy, can't get your cast wet, don't take showers, not a problem. Just take a bath every once in a while. After a couple of days, my mom started to notice that my hair had an aroma, I guess, to it. And she said, we need to wash your hair. So she made me climb up on the kitchen counter, lay out flat, stick my head over the sink, and she washed my hair. Now, my mom at the time was a middle school teacher. She had arthritis in her knees. I was the youngest of 3 kids, and I'm pretty sure that the last thing she wanted to do every day when she got home, on top of all of her other whatever she did chores, which I'm sure were a lot, was to wash her 13-year-old son's nasty hair in the kitchen sink. But she did. I mean, she didn't have to wash my hair. I mean, come on, I'm 13 years old. Why can't I figure out how to wash my own hair? But she felt like she had to. She didn't have to wash my hair, but she had to. Jesus did not have to wash the disciples' feet, but he had to. He had to wash the disciples' feet because in that moment, it is a show of his absolute, utter devotion and love and service to them. To everyone who was there that night, when Jesus washed their feet, he was showing them his absolute devotion, all that he could give to them. Which kind of explains that weird interaction with Peter. You know, at first, Peter says, oh no, you can't wash my feet, Lord. Because remember, completely unheard of. For a free man to be washing another free man's feet. But then when Jesus says, oh no, I have to, Peter, of course, well, of course, wash my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Peter, bless his heart, he just doesn't get it. And Jesus says, no, you don't need that much. Because in washing his feet, Jesus was giving all that he had. He gave all of his love, all of his devotion, all of his humility, all of his service to his disciples just by washing their feet. And when you give all that you have of something, there's no more to give. If he had washed Peter's hands and his head, he wouldn't have loved him or served him or been devoted to him any more than when he just washed his feet. And remember, he did this for everyone who was there that night. Now, we don't have a list of who all was there. There's not like a checklist that the host was going to invite you to RSVP or any of that kind of stuff. But we're pretty sure it was the disciples. And that means we're pretty sure Judas was there too. In the text that Penny read at the very beginning of the text, it says that the devil had already put it into his heart that Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, was going to betray him. And later, after what we just read, we hear Jesus say that one of you will betray me. One of you whose feet I have just washed. One of you whom I love completely and am devoted to entirely. One of you whom I am willing to humble myself to and serve. You will betray me. Jesus' act is complete. There are no conditions. He is utterly and completely devoted to his disciples. Despite what they have done, despite what they might do, his act of devotion is completely to them. And then he goes on to say to them, this is an example that I have set for you. This example of foot washing. This is what you should do. If you know these things, you will be blessed by doing these things. Now, the act of foot washing, it's more than just foot washing, right? It's just like when we come to this table. When we come to this table, it's more than just bread and juice. It's more than just coming together and have something to eat. There is something more here. When we are baptized, it's more than just sprinkling water on the forehead. There is something more there. When Jesus washes the disciples' feet and tells them to wash feet, it is more than just removing dirt from someone's feet. It is an example of how to live. An example of how to be. An example of how to live in complete and utter devotion to others, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they have done, regardless of what they may do in the future, regardless of if they smell funny in class, regardless of if they live on the street, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of whatever label we want to put on them that we don't like. We are called to utterly love them, to be devoted to them, and to serve them. And Jesus says, if we know these things, come on, we know these things. And if you did it before now you know these things. If you know these things and do these things, you will be blessed by them. Foot washing is more than just removing dirt from someone else's feet. Foot washing is a way of living. Amen?